Hello everyone, welcome. I'm Mark McCormack. I'm a Professor of Sociology here at the University of Roehampton, and I'm Director of the Centre for Equality, Justice and Social Change. It's a pleasure to be hosting this event. Our colleague, Professor John Eade, who is part of this project, is a member of the Centre and a valued member of the Department of Social Sciences. And so it's great to be hosting this here. I'm not going to talk myself about the event specifically, because I'll let John and others speak better to it. I'm just going to mention briefly that the Research Centre is here to kind of support and develop work that connects around issues of equality and justice, and also relates social change more broadly as well. And so to consider things both in the current, but in a historical perspective too. And I'm just going to introduce some of the esteemed speakers we've got for today. And that's particularly Lalit Mohan Joshi, a film historian, documentary maker, documentary filmmaker, former BBC broadcaster, and the director of the South Asian Cinema Foundation. His documentaries include Beyond Partition, Niranjan Pao, A Forgotten Legend, and East Meets West, Indo-British Cinematic Encounters. He's also edited several books on films around Bollywood, and several others, and a biographical dictionary of Indo-British cinema. And it's great to have him here today to present the promo of his latest documentary, Beyond Caricatures, which is based on this project. And also to have Kusum Pant Joshi here. Dr. Joshi is a social historian, researcher, and writer. Her first publication, The Kashmiri Pandit, Story of a Community in Exile, back in 1987, was an edited version of her PhD thesis that was submitted to the University of Sydney in Australia. She profiled a selection of South Asian women achievers in Kaleidoscope, South Asian Women in the UK, back in 2000. She is the chief researcher of the Heritage Project awarded to the South Asian Cinema Foundation, which is being presented today. And she has completed her recent book, Selective Inclusion, African and Asian Celebrities in London's Vanity Fair magazine. And then the third person is Professor Lynn, the great granddaughter of His Royal Highness, the last Nawab Nizam of Bengal, Bahir and Orissa. Born and educated in Australia, Lynn moved to North America and developed her interest in cultural nationalism, focusing on Irish, African, African-American and Caribbean literatures. She earned her PhD from Cornell University and taught at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, where she became associate editor of Akiki, an African journal of new writing. And she is currently Emeritus Professor of Postcolonial Literatures at the University of Kent in Canterbury. So it's wonderful to have three such distinguished speakers for today's event, as well as other colleagues and guests who I'll let the Roehampton people introduce themselves when it's their time. And yeah, I'm looking forward to an interesting and, well, yeah, fascinating seminar this afternoon to evening. And so I'm now going to hand over to Professor John Eade to introduce the project and the links between the university and the SACF. John.
Thanks, Mark. Yes, as Mark was explaining, I'm the link person between the university and this fascinating heritage lottery project. I've been involved in two previous projects, one on Bangladeshi three generations living in Britain, and another one on the Congolese community. And besides this one currently, I'm also involved in an analysis of Brookwood Cemetery in terms of its fascinating, diverse cultural heritage. Excuse me. I'll just explain my link with the South Asian Cinema Foundation. Lalit reminded me today that I've been linked to the SACF for over 15 years, during which time I've had a wonderful time watching wonderful Indian films and meeting some great Indian film directors, including Shyam Benegal, most impressive person who's still making films at the moment. He's in Bangladesh, apparently. My role here was really to kind of talk to Lalit and Kusum about how the project's going, and also to engage with the volunteers in debating the issues that come out of the project, fascinating issues of intersections of race, class, gender, which we'll be talking about as we go along, and the kind of ambivalent, ambiguous relationships between Britain and colonial territories during this time, late 19th century, early 20th century, very significant period in British imperial history. And my particular role was to work on the famous Indian Test cricketer, Ranjit Singhji, partly because I've spent a lot of time playing cricket. So it was very personally fascinating to me to learn more about him, someone who, like many others, managed to bring together two different, at least two different things. In his case, sport at an international level, first Indian non-white person to play in a Test cricket match against Australia. And also he was prince of a principality in Gujarat and became a major political figure during the 1920s and 30s for his death. So that's my role, and I'll get out the way and hand over to Lalit, I think, now.
Yes, hello, everyone. I'm Kusum here. I'll just briefly introduce the project just to give you an idea of what we have been doing. This project called Selective Inclusion, African and Asian Celebrities in London's Vanity Fair magazine, 1868 to 1914, for which we received funding from the Heritage Lottery grant. We started the project in December 2019, and the aim of the project was to find out and highlight 28 African and Asian celebrities featured in the Vanity Fair between the years of our study, and at a time when this magazine was one of the elite magazines of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Luckily for us, by March 2020, just before COVID hit us all, we were fortunate to have completed our main training and research at the British Library with our group of volunteers. We were also fortunate to have almost completed a big section of our schoolwork of organizing and running our cartoon workshop sessions in collaboration with the Cartoon Museum in London.
Yes, good morning.
For between 80 to 100 school pupils. But then COVID happened, and we were fortunate that technology came to our rescue. We took advantage of Zoom to proceed with meeting our targets for the completion of the project. So because of Zoom, we were able to undertake training, further training for our volunteers. We carried out oral history interviewing techniques training for them. We also trained our volunteers in documentary filmmaking through an expert filmmaker. And we also had an art historian, Dr. Temi Odemosu, who helped us and guided us and our volunteers to look critically at cartoons and caricatures. So we found that instead of being paralyzed by COVID, we were able to internationalize our project by throwing our net right across the world. So instead of just getting some London volunteers or people only local to participate as volunteers or as people who were interested in the project and attended our events, we have been able to reach out and get volunteers and participants from lands as far away as Hong Kong, Thailand, India, and even Pakistan. Please visit our website to get an idea of the contribution of our local and international volunteers in this project. I would also now like to tell you briefly about how we met our other project aims through the internet and through Zoom events to gather the 28 Vanity Fair caricatures who were featured in the Vanity Fair between 1868 and 1914, and also to get the actual Vanity Fair biographies of these celebrities. We were able to order them either from some antique shops or through the National Portrait Gallery. We were also able to get the help of some volunteers who were not just interested in the project, as people wanting to know more about the project, but were also artists in their own right. And in this field, I'm very happy to point out Dr. Sushma Sabnis, who is here today. She is a retired pediatrician from Essex and is a trained artist. She has contributed a number of excellent portraits, trying to highlight those who were excluded by the Vanity Fair. We also were able to organize paintings by students from Thailand. So that is a bit about our volunteer contribution. We were also able to organize an online exhibition because we were not able to do a real exhibition. We were successful in organizing an online exhibition, which went on for a couple of days and which all our volunteers participated by showing some of the caricatures and also talking about the persons who were represented in these caricatures. We were also able to organize talks on key figures or celebrities who were featured in the Vanity Fair. Those who gave talks about important celebrities featured in Vanity Fair in our project included presentations by some descendants of our project celebrities, such as Dr. Lynn, who is a descendant of Nawab Mansur Ali Khan, and also the author of The Last Prince of Bengal. I'm also happy to mention Mrs. Monisha Garbo Ganham and her daughters who are here today, Diana, as well as Sarah. They are descendants of the Maharaja of Cooch Behar, Maharaja Nripendra Narayan Bhug Bahadur. They have been participating in our project and also gave us some insights into their ancestor. We were also lucky to have Narisa Chakrabansi, a writer, publisher, and environmentalist, who is a direct descendant of Prince Vajiravad, who became the king of Siam or Thailand in 1910. And Narisa has also contributed a chapter to our book. Technology also helped us to get input from other experts for our book. Again, I would like to mention Lynn, who has written the foreword for our book. And Narisa, I just mentioned, she has written a chapter on Prince Vajiravad, her ancestor. And we were also able to find Dr. Bakhtiar Dadabhoy, who helped us polish our chapter on Sir Salar Jung of Hyderabad. So we were able to proceed with our book production despite COVID. And the book is now ready. And I look forward to Lynn Inns to launch this book for us today. The remaining tasks of our project are now a project pageant. A project pageant was to have been organized in collaboration with a local school where the pupils were to participate and dress up like some of the key personalities in our project. But unfortunately, the school, because of COVID, was unable to go ahead with this idea. So we have now converted it into a pageant in which adults are going to participate. Again, it will be an international kind of a Zoom event in which people from not only Britain, but also from India will be participating. And lots of people from all over the world will be hopefully attending it. The last bit of our work that remains is the documentary film, for which a promo I'm really looking forward to screening today. And the documentary will hopefully be done within the time that we have got. So thank you for listening. And if there are any questions later, I am very happy to answer. Thank you very much.
Thank you, that's great. So now I'm going to hand over to Lalit to introduce the documentary and show the promo. And then that will lead into Lynn. But so yeah, over to Lalit.
Thank you very much, Mark, for providing South Asian Cinema Foundation this platform to launch our book and talk about the project. So the credit for one of our final events goes to the newly set up Center for Equality, Justice and Social Change. A big thanks to you and also to John and your other colleagues. As a project coordinator of the Selective Inclusion project, I have enjoyed working and learning and meeting so many people like Lynn and many volunteers, young, middle-aged, all ages, and who have all contributed. So without going into any detail, I think my promo of my documentary should speak about the project, and I would tempt all of you to attend the 12th event, as mentioned by Kusum. So many people you will meet the past great people, including Mansoor Ali Khan, which will be played by me. So I would request Vikal Pandey, my editor, who will play this promo from Nainital, the city in India, the hill station, which was a very loved city of the British during their time, and it used to be the summer capital of United Provinces. Over to you, Vikal, from Nainital. And I would request everybody to keep their mics mute.
Early 2020, before COVID gripped Britain, Kusum Pant Joshi is leading a group of volunteers at the British Library to explore how a late 19th century magazine, Vanity Fair, profiled celebrities from Africa and Asia. While surfing the internet, she bumps into Professor Lynn's 12th in the line of descent from Mir Jafar, and the great-granddaughter of Nawab Mansoor Ali Khan. Lynn's recent book, The Last Prince of Bengal, offers fascinating insights into this period.
Well, the magazine set out to show the vanity of British society, of the elite in British society, including the politicians, and to some extent it included the visiting celebrities from India and Africa.
Professor John Eade, who has been supervising the project, believes the magazine reflected the political and social aspirations of the British Empire during the late 19th century.
It's a very interesting mixture of the portrayal of famous people and also commentary on them. And the editor, Bowles, wanted to influence the elite, the political and social elite. And he had a very distinct idea of what they should be doing.
Kusum Pant Joshi's book, Selective Inclusion, African and Asian Celebrities in London's Vanity Fair magazine, takes an in-depth look into the text and subtext of this journal as visualized and edited by Thomas Gibson Bowles.
Selecting the subjects for featuring in the Vanity Fair, I think the editor must have picked these people primarily because of their importance and the interest that they would arouse in the readers. So they were all very important personalities, whether they were from India or from other parts of Asia or from Africa. They were all highly politically important, very mostly very affluent people who had made an important contribution in the society and administration of their country, or they were emperors and rulers, statesmen. There are some sportsmen as well. There is a barrister. So they're all successful, important people.
Sold for 1 shilling a copy, the magazine hit the stands in London every week for over 46 years. Was it the period of its publication that made it the barometer of English attitudes and fashions?
I think the second half of the 19th century is fascinating from an English-British point of view, really, because the Industrial Revolution was changing society massively. And Bowles was very worried about the development of mass, of the populace, if you like.
Through our book and documentary, our project explores whether the inclusion of the profiles from Africa and Asia was based on selective inclusion, and secondly, were their caricatures and accompanying biographies not a true representation of these celebrities?
When he saw the caricature of himself in Vanity Fair, he was extremely upset and very angry because he felt that it portrayed him as a minor figure. It showed him as a small figure with his dominated by glasses. It emphasized his clothing rather than his respectability, and it contrasted very much with the very regal portraits of him that were back in the palace in Murshidabad.
SACF's young volunteer Uttara Sukanya Joshi feels the same about the caricature of Emperor Gojong of Korea, who was featured in Vanity Fair on 19th October 1899.
Well, the caricature of Emperor Gojong, it is not a true representation of how he really looked. It clearly was drawn with the intention of ridiculing him and creating this narrative that was quite derogatory, that lacked empathy.
Vanity Fair featured 7 celebrities from Africa, 8 from China, Japan and Southeast Asia, and 13 from India. Among Indian dignitaries were Maharaja Dilip Singh, Sar Pratap Singh, Sar Bhavnagre, the Aga Khan, Ranjit Singh Ji, and Maharaja Rajinder Singh. SACF volunteer Seema Vedi has reservations on his portrayal too.
That caricature was a little bit not to the potential of Maharaja Rajinder Singh. He was such a grand royal, and he was a very good sportsman, and he was very intelligent person and true royal, but the caricature does not represent all that. This looks more like a cartoon, not the true representation of any of his features.
Is it far-fetched to conclude that African and Asian celebrities were deliberately misrepresented? Is there some truth that their accompanying bios were far from perfect?
I do not think that the way the caricatures were made or the portraits were made had any racist intention or inspiration. But perhaps the biographies that went with them sometimes smack of an element of racism, which was perhaps part of the mental makeup of many of the people during those times.
More than a century after Vanity Fair ceased publication in 1914, the question is, are the secrets of the rulers, statesmen and elite of the era and the machinations of the British Empire that lie hidden in its pages still relevant?
No, I think what it shows us is that late 19th century still has resonance today.
The British public needs to be much more aware of the history of British relations with Africa and India in the 19th century, not just in the present.
Thank you very much, Vikal, for playing that. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that was fascinating and looks like a great documentary. So I think it's me now to introduce Lynn, I believe. And Lynn, you've been introduced already. We saw you on the screen. Do you want to now? Shall I hand over to you?
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes. Well, I thought that documentary was fascinating. I hadn't seen it, and in a way, it seems to have said almost everything I thought I was going to say in introducing the book, which is splendid. And I want to say how delighted I was when Kusum first contacted me and told me about the project, and it has been wonderfully rewarding to be involved with this project. It has widened my whole sense of both the culture of the 19th century with regard to its relationships, but also very interestingly, I think the artists, the ways in which caricatures worked. And I found it very interesting that there was often a contrast between the caricature and the text. As Kusum pointed out, in one sense, she felt that many of the caricatures were not racist, but the text was. I think I had the opposite sense in some cases, particularly in my great-grandfather's case, where he was seen as a very diminished character, and the emphasis was on his clothing, his exoticness, whereas the actual article about him, the biography, was extremely sympathetic, you know, a victim of British injustice. So it is interesting, I think, to see that those very complex interactions in those pages of Vanity Fair, which was a very important magazine. It was read by all the upper middle classes, the aspiring to be part of the elite, and it does reflect, I think, many of the social attitudes of that period, but it reflects them in a complex and often fractured way. And I think that's important for us to understand that it isn't a simple, straightforward narrative at all. And so I think this book is beautifully presented and published with wonderful illustrations, is really an important book, because not only does it allow us to begin to understand much better that past, those attitudes, it introduces us to many people that I'm sure most British readers and indeed worldwide readers are unaware of, and are unaware of their significance in terms of their visits. And it also gets a sense of the culture, of the artistry of the period, and what appealed to the British public. So I'm delighted to see this book, and I'm looking forward to reading it properly very soon. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't know whether, well, thank you for that. That was really interesting, Lynn. And I'm sure whether it's Kusum or others, well, there'll be a Q&A where maybe there can be just some dialogue between some of you that might be really interesting. I'm not sure if there's anyone else who wants to speak who've been part of the project, or whether I should hand over Kusum to launch the book now.
Possibly, I think, Kusum, Mark, if I have your permission, we can, Lynn can launch the book, and then Kusum can invite the volunteers that have decided to speak. So
brilliant, thank you.
Could I request Lynn to raise the book so that we all who have the copies, we can. And I can request Alka to take some pictures.
And yeah, it looks great. Unfortunately, my copy's in my office on campus currently, unfortunately.
No problem.
And there was a question. So there was a question in the chat: Is the book available? Is the book available now? Can people buy it, or how if people want to read it, how do they go about getting it?
Yes, Mark, it will be available in a couple of days, because we are going to get a next consignment in a day or two, and then we will put it on our website, and people can buy the book. And so definitely we'll be very happy to people to get the book.
And perhaps maybe one of you wants to post the website into the chat as well, so people can access it if they don't know the website.
Yes,
already.
Yeah, very good question. I'll put the website now.
Great. And yeah, it's certainly a lovely book with several of the caricatures themselves are in there, which is just good to see as well. Yeah, and like on the cover.
So, Kusum, you can invite the...
Yeah. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello. Now I would like to welcome either of our two volunteers. So who is it going to be? Is it Bhakti first or is it Alka? Shall we go in alphabetical order with A and B or B and A?
Okay, I'll keep the silence as it's me then.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, so thanks everyone. And the project has been quite enlightening. It has been such an honor to be part of such a big project. And the timing has been perfect just before the pandemic. And I wouldn't have, gone through the entire pandemic if it were not for this project, because I got like so much of extra time as well to, research and analyze things. So that has been quite a blessing as well. One thing I wanted to I understood by this project was like the 1800s. The entire century is something that we all have to go back and look at what all happened and how it is also affecting our current and present scenario. Basically, the concept of fake news that we understand from a new technology perspective, something that we think that has happened only after, say, Facebook or media or something like that. But I think we have to go back to 1800s to find out whether it started way before, like maybe hundreds or 200 years back. So that's something very interesting to note, which I found from this project. And the second thing I noticed was like I studied in India, and I think the way history has been taught to me as a student, I think there is a more fun or more, a better way to understand history. This is what I understood from this project. And I personally believe like there has been a lot that has been missed in school books, in history school books in India, which I think should come back. So it has been a delightful project, and it's amazing to meet so many people online as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alka, for all your comments and your participation and your contribution. And I take this opportunity to thank all our volunteers, some of whom are here today as well. Yes, now Bhakti Devdhar, will you please say what?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Hello, everyone. My name is Bhakti Devdhar, and I'm one of the volunteers for this project. First of all, I would really like to thank Kusum for giving me the chance to become a part of this wonderful project. It was like Alakananda said, it was a fascinating project, a very enriching one. And it gave me a chance, on the one hand, to look into the English popular culture in the Victorian era, so look into the magazine and also some of the contributors in the magazine. In my case, it was the caricaturist Leslie Ward, whose pseudonym was Spy, and I had no idea about him. So it was a great pleasure and a very enlightening experience to know about the magazine and his caricatures. And of course, on the other hand, I was very interested to know some of the celebrities from Asia and Africa, particularly from Africa. I chose to write on and research on an Abyssinian general called Ras Makonnen. Again, the reason was I had no idea who he was and how he came to Britain and how he landed in the magazine of Vanity Fair. So it was with this point of departure that I took the plunge and started reading about him. And it was fascinating to know that he was a very distinguished personality from Ethiopia and came to Britain around 1902 and was featured in this magazine. It was also great to know that he was, unlike the other caricatures in the magazine, his portrait in the magazine was not very much of a caricature, but it was more like a realistic portrait. And I also found out that it had more to do with the fact that the caricaturist Spy, he had a kind of a turning point in his career. So he had made a switch from caricatures to a realistic portrait. So his Ras Makonen's portrait in Vanity Fair kind of coincided with his the turning point, his career as a caricaturist. So there was a lot of history to know about and a lot of fascinating insight to know about this distinguished personality who had an illustrious military career, a suave diplomat, and who toured Britain in 1902. So that was great to know about him. And I learned a lot from this project. I enjoyed my visit to British Library. I superbly enjoyed the 2 sessions taken by Dr. Professor Temi, as an art historian, who gave us insight how to read these caricatures, how to look beyond these portraits and behind these portraits, how to look into what goes on behind the scenes. So that was also superbly enriching. So thank you, SACF, for giving me this chance, and all the best for the documentary film as well. I think it's coming across really, really well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bhakti. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
This is our colleague Ian Haywood, Professor of English in the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, and an expert on many things, but including political caricature, isn't it? So Ian's gratefully agreed to just offer some reflections or comments now. So over to Ian. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, great. It's I'm so honoured to be asked to contribute to this launch event and to have a little role in the project at this late stage. I'm just going to share screen with you. Can you all see that? Is that? Let me go to the.
Yeah.
I want to go to the beginning though of the slideshow. Where do I? Hang on. I've lost my. I can't see my controls. Hang on a minute. Slideshow from the beginning. I want. Yeah, it should be full screen now. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you very much again to the team, to Kusum, to Lalit, to John Eid, to Mark, and to everyone for allowing me to make a humble contribution to this project, and indeed to opening up a new world for me as well. This isn't the area that I research on, but as you can see, I have done a lot of work on caricature slightly further back, British caricature, two books and a number of articles. I've also worked on the British Labour movement, particularly on Chartism and the literature and visual imagery associated with that. So radicalism more generally. So my main expertise is on what you might call the golden age of caricature. That's the book on the left there, Romanticism and Caricature. This is the age dominated by people like James Gilray and Thomas Rowlandson and the Cruikshanks. And it's worth saying, therefore, that by the time of Vanity Fair, the professional caricaturist, who could make a living out of doing these kinds of satirical images, was already, a century old. But of course, it had gone through a number of important changes. And one of those big changes is what this second book that came out, again, just at the start of the pandemic, not the best time, The Rise of Victorian Caricature, was about, because the story goes that the sort of golden age of caricature was, extremely sort of free artistically. You could caricature the king. There's really no limits to it. As you can see on the cover, this is Catherine the Great, who's getting the spear from death, through her skull. And that once this great age had passed, caricature became less kind of hard-hitting, less savage, less aggressive, and certainly less indecent when it came to things like nudity and the grotesque bodies. So the story goes that that age disappears, and then we arrive in the Victorian era with the age of punch. So what my book was doing was filling in that gap between the two periods. And what I wanted to show was that indeed, in fact, there were a variety of formats for caricature before it sort of settled down into the magazine format, which is what, of course, Vanity Fair is part of. Vanity Fair is a late production of something that started 30, 40 years earlier. And I've just given you a couple of images here to show you the range that was available to people, from quite expensive lithography, which takes us, I think, to Vanity Fair, where the figures themselves are not heavily caricatured or distorted, but really the power comes from the situation, you know, the dramatic situation that's been shown. In this case, this is Henry Brougham, who was a leading Whig politician at the time, as power crazy, as a megalomaniac, as you can see. So he's shown as a colossus, but his facial features are not heavily caricatured. And then we have the cheap woodcuts, which is a whole other market, sort of penny caricatures, and no one has researched those. So my book really brings all that to light for the first time. And indeed, this is where I saw an immediate connection with your wonderful project, because my second book was something of a recovery project. So I was delighted to see that this is, in a sense, what your project is, isn't it? It's a recovery project in a very, very basic sense, because you found these images, you know, still lying dormant in the pages of a periodical. And I'm a huge fan. I do a lot of work on periodicals. So, you know, it's both kind of connected to art history, but it's also very fundamentally connected to the influence of periodicals in the 19th century, which is still kind of underrated, it seems to me. You know, there were so many of them, thousands and thousands of periodicals. And it would be interesting to know if you could follow up this work, wouldn't it, by tracing or finding images in other periodicals. But what your images show straight away is, you know, the power of caricature to connect with the past, even if, you know, there's an element of offensiveness about them, and caricature is designed to offend. You know, that's its raison d'etre, really, is to provoke and offend. They've connected us to the past in a really quite gripping way. And if then that becomes the point for a different kind of historical research into the so-called real figures behind these satirical portraits, you know, all well and good. But what we have here is a kind of pantheon, you know, a gallery. And it's in colour, which I think is also very important, because although that made the images more expensive, and by the way, I was absolutely delighted. I've got to kind of flash this. But in my book, I somehow managed to fool Palgrave into doing some colour images, which, you know, publishers rarely do these days. So I'm delighted your images are in colour. The other, also as a leader of a network called the Romantic Illustration Network, I'm also interested in this conjunction between the text and between the image and the text, because both Kusum and Lynn have already given slightly different interpretations of that relationship, and I think that's all well to the good. You know, was the primary interest in the image, and then you turn to the text in the sense in which the text is secondary to the image. So in a way, the text is an illustration of the image, because the original meaning of the word illustration was not how we see it now. In fact, illustration could refer to a textual description of an image, what we now call ekphrasis. So that's something that definitely, I think, you know, is worth further exploration or highlighting. And that image of the surrounding text or the surrounding context within the magazine, you know, is also an important issue, isn't it? Because who really has the control here? As I say, the narrative that's been told is that the satirists really lost their independence and had to kind of succumb to the power of the editor. So the achievement of Vanity Fair is an achievement of the magazine, you know, the editor themselves, who now has more control. So there are two things going on. One is Victorian morality, which the respectability thesis, which imposes itself, you know, the kind of gentrification, the genteel move towards more genteel, less offensive imagery, imposes itself on visual satire. But so too does the mode of production, which is primarily through magazines rather than independently produced single sheet caricatures, which were pinned up in, you know, shop windows and so on. And I can illustrate this point quickly, I will move on, very appropriately with a quote from William Thackeray, who of course wrote the novel Vanity Fair. So I thought you might enjoy this because it seems very appropriate. And what I'll read is just the second half, where he says that we have washed, combed, clothed and taught the rogue, that's satire, good manners. Yeah, we've taught the rogue good manners. So now satire has become gentle and harmless, smitten into shame by the pure presence of our women and the sweet confiding smiles of our children, which is of course very stereotypical in itself at the end there. What counts as an inoffensive culture and inoffensive audience, but the question of different audiences for your images, particularly women, for example, who I'm sure read the paper, would be interesting, wouldn't it? So in a sense, what we're looking at is good-mannered caricature, but that in itself, that view was something of a caricature, because of course, Punch itself could use very violent imagery if it wanted. And here's a post Sepoy uprising image, and that we could talk about that quite a lot if we wanted. I'm not sure it's quite so pro-imperialist as some commentators have suggested. So that it's not as if that violent imagery disappears. It's still there if it's needed. But the grotesque body on the whole is less visible, unless in fairly extreme cases. But as you've shown in at least one instance, you have the grotesque body here. In other words, this very kind of emaciated sort of stick figure here. But in the other cases, there's very little formal caricature, as you say, and it's more about pose, posture, dress, things which in a way might hit the celebrity culture quite hard, because what is celebrity culture after all, except about looking good, you know, about looking glamorous, about looking beautiful. And so I think what we've got here is a much longer tradition of the celebrity or exotic celebrity portrait, which I would trace back at least to Omai, you know, in the 18th century, but I'm sure you can trace this back further. But all you have to do there, and children could do this with an identikit, is just put different clothes on, you know, and you immediately got kind of mock epic on, you know, having your mock image. It's literally redressing. The other meaning of redressing, as in righting wrongs, has an ironic relationship to satire, which literally redresses public figures and famous figures. So I'm nearly done. So one thing again that I was interested in is what happens when caricature itself becomes a part of the culture of the previously or still colonized territories. You know, do we associate the growth of caricature automatically with a kind of democratic progress? So the sort of takeaway, one of the takeaways I took from the project is about, you know, the limits of caricature insofar as it's a force for democracy. It's very obviously it's a very good way in to cultural and historical and political debates. At its root is what Bakhtin, the critic Bakhtin, called the carnivalesque. So the right to be irreverent towards those in power, you know, towards elites. But if you're doing that from a position of colonial power, does that mean it's already unacceptable? We should never look at a caricature for realism, should we? There might be elements of realism, but the whole point is to shift the focus to something that's exaggerated or incorrect or incongruous, you know, to ridicule. That is the raison d'etre of caricature. But it seems that, you know, if you're doing it from a position of power rather than a position of attacking those in power, it's less acceptable, isn't it, to have those what Thackeray called foul hits? Yes, how can that be done? So, so I think that's my last image. So it's a great way in. It's a great portal into cultural and historical controversy, which is often very complex. And that's one of the reasons I love studying caricatures. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. That was great and really interesting, and great to have that kind of broader perspective as well. Before we get onto the Q&A section, I just want to, you know, one of the great things of being a centre director or kind of similar thing is you get to be part of projects and research and activities that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise do. And this has been one of those occasions where it's been like the promo for the documentary itself looks brilliant. To hear the different speakers talk about their reflections on the book and the project more generally has been fascinating, and Ian as well, thank you. And so thank you to all the contributors, particularly John at Roehampton for doing his work on the project, and then I think particularly to Kusum and Lalit for doing their really important work on the book and the documentary. I mean, I think they're both really powerful kind of contributions to understanding these issues, and I'm really pleased to have been a part of it and to be here for this event as well. So thank you. But for the Q&A, I don't know if, John, if you've got any questions you want to lead off on, or whether that's putting on the spot, or if there's kind of volunteers, people can unmute and ask. If someone wants to type in the chat, they can also do that. But I'll open up the Q&A to questions.
No, I think I want to hand over to others because I've had my chance.
Cool, thank you. One question I've had before we open it up, well, to give people time to kind of reflect and think of particular questions. I had wondered, listening to Ian's talk and seeing the pictures and these different elements, my brother has an interest in kind of Vanity Fair caricatures of Church of England priests from that period. And one of the things that struck me as well is the focus on uniform as part of it too, that there's some caricature of the features, but also the uniform of the Church of England men is one component, and I think cricketers are also another. And it just struck me that potentially one of the things they went to quite a bit was the uniform that people were wearing as well, which then might lead to some of the ways in which it could either be racist or come across as kind of having some of those racist components for that reason. And I don't know, that was a reflection. I wondered if there was any kind of truth to that, or whether there is that kind of focus on uniform. Maybe it's an observation, maybe it's something to reflect on, or just time for someone else to ask another question.
Well, I was just to follow up on that, Mark. Clearly it was a fashionable magazine. So, and of course, Vanity Fair still is still around, and it's sponsored by all the kind of labels. So I think it fits in quite well with this link between the late 19th century and today. But I wanted to kind of mention the kind of ambivalence, that although the caricatures might, do appear demeaning in some cases, people wanted to be on the cover of these magazines. So there's always a kind of ambivalence about being a celebrity.
Lalit.
Yeah, I've got a question. I was really overwhelmed and fascinated by Ian's presentation. I would like to congratulate you for your presentation and your book. And my question is, how can I get your book? And would love to read it, to review it for our website.
If you email me your address, I'll send you a free copy as a gift to the project.
Oh, lovely! That's really very kind, and I'm overwhelmed. Thank you. I will send you through an email my address.
Thank you. And if I could just, in relation to the point about fashion and dress and costume, again, the British Museum, you went to do primary research on this material, so no doubt you've come across the British Museum's collection of caricatures, from the slightly earlier period, and traditionally they've been divided up into two types. Basically, what Dorothy George, the woman who originally catalogued virtually all of them, which was an incredible task, and wrote explanations of them all, on the one hand said they were political caricatures, so they were mainly interested in public history and politicians, and then she said there were personal and social caricatures, and it's true enough to say that the so-called social ones haven't received as much attention from critics, but that's where you find the satire, the satirizing of fashion, and that's where you'll find a lot of images of women, of course, and they're quite remarkable. I mean, a lot of them, George Cruikshank, for example, did a regular series called Monstrosities, and the monstrosities are not what you'd think. It's not people, it's the gear they're wearing, particularly the headgear, which, and I always think, protruding headgear is very easily caricatured as well, isn't it? Whether it's, feathers like the Prince of Wales feathers, or hats, and some of these caricatures, so these hats are bigger than and taller than the people, so I think it's kind of open house, in some ways pageantry and pomposity in all its forms, it seems to me, cross-cultural, is so easily caricatured. It's sort of very open for caricature, isn't it? to sort of knock this down a peg or two by either just making it even more flamboyant, you know, it's like Jonathan Swift's 2 books of Gulliver's Travels. You know, the first book is about the little people and the second book is about the big people. But the point is, it's about proportion. And all you're doing is taking the proportions out of their normal range. You know, so we've already said that Lynn's ancestor was offended by being made short. You know, that's the Lilliputian response, isn't it? To satirize politicians by turning them all important people by just making them small. You don't have to do anything else. You just make them small so that their pretensions to grandeur look ridiculous at that point. But of course, if you also make them big, you end up like Henry Broome as a colossus, which is an image of megalomania, you know, or you make their clothes too big for their body. And again, they look ridiculous, or you make their clothes too small. I mean, so this is all playing games with proportion, isn't it? But I just think, you know, as John hinted, the world of celebrity, the world of the rich and famous and the elite is easy pickings at one level, isn't it, for satire.
And just to quickly, that's really interesting. And it made me think, as you were saying that, Ian, it's funny, it's the Donald Trump was famed as the short-fingered vulgarian, as this kind of, which apparently he was furious about back in many years ago, but that was all written about in Vanity Fair. And so it's just interesting, one of the more recent caricatures around it was in Vanity Fair itself. Kusum, sorry, I think you want to come in. And are you on, just need, yeah, there we go.
I have a question, if I may, Ian. Would you like to throw some light on why you think no women from Africa or Asia was ever included in Vanity Fair? There are lots of these men, far less compared to British and European and American, but no woman at all. And it wasn't that there weren't very many women celebrities. If they wanted celebrities, there were lots of women celebrities visiting England many times and very much in the news. What do you think accounts for this non-inclusion and complete ignoring of women?
Yes, I mean, this is where, you know, the limits of my knowledge kick in, because I know I don't know enough about the period. But I mean, were these women involved in politics in any way? You know, were they prominent enough to kind of you know, fall, sort of come into the radar, in the sense of the radar of the satirist, or would they have been, in a way, what the satire directed at the men would automatically kind of cover them in some sense?
Well, the women, for instance, who we think would have been included were, say, the wives of some of these celebrities, like the Maharaja of Baroda, Sayaji Rao. His wife was very important. She used to visit England very often. Similarly, Maharaja Nripendra Narayan Bhoop Bahadur of Cooch Behar, his wife and all his children were studying here. And she was very much in the news. She was invited by the Queen to attend the coronation, and she was given an award. I think she got the CIE, and she was the 10th woman to get this award. So they were very much very prominent, and they were not in Parda. So it wasn't that, oh, these Indian women, they won't agree to be made public figures of.
I mean, I guess the thing is, Kusum, in a way, whichever answer you give is unflattering in the, you know, either it's that, I mean, you could say it's good taste, so they're kind of being chivalrous, you know, not satirizing the women, which isn't very flattering either, because you think, well, then they're not important enough to be flattered, or you say, well, you know, they simply ignored them, you know, they just, you know, they were being, you know, horribly kind of masculinist or exclusive in that sense. I mean, I have to say that there aren't that many women who fall into even into the golden age of caricature, yeah, who were regarded as being in the public sphere and therefore eligible to be caricatured. I mean, there's Georgiana, you know, Princess of Devonshire, because she was involved in the 1780s in the political campaign of Charles James Fox. So there are lots of caricatures of her, because that was an attempt to undermine Fox, who was, of course, the opposition you know, the opposition to the Tory government. So she fell foul of that kind of negative propaganda. But you know, there isn't one or two writers, you know, pop up. But I mean, it's a good question. But you know, if you say it's good taste on the one hand, that's not really adequate. And if you say it's pure sexism, that's not good. I'm glad there are photographs, however, because one of the other points about your project, isn't it, is that these are not the only images in circulation. But so what your project is doing is also kind of releasing all the other images, that the non-satirical images that are there, which I think, you know, prior to this period, the main source of the non-satirical portrait was painting, wasn't it? But by this point, you'd also got photography, haven't you? So the satire is playing off interestingly against the photography, isn't it? And I suppose what you don't get is a collective caricature of the whole family, you know, the family portraits. I don't think there's a caricature version of that, but I don't know the area well enough to know if there is indeed.
Yeah, thank you for your insights, but I still wonder, because not all the people included in the Vanity Fair were objects of caricature and satire. For instance, Salar Jung is not at all being made an object of criticism or satire or any such thing. It's just like a straightforward account of his contribution, a very positive biography kind of a thing, and his image is also equally complimentary. So although they called it caricatures, it's not really in that category. So my question, I think I would still wonder. Right. Yes. Thank you very much anyway for your insight.
It's a very good question and worth lots further investigation. That's it. Absolutely.
Thank you.
John, I think you have a question.
Yeah, it was really tracking back to the discussion of the British Museum and fashion, because I was thinking of the Victorian Albert, you know, the V&A, which has a massive collection of aesthetic objects. And that really links to the way in which, of course, empires take what they want, which comes across very strongly in the lives of the people that were caricatured. I think particularly Duleep Singh and the Kohinoor. And in the book, there's this wonderful meeting between Queen Victoria and Duleep Singh, where she shows him the Kohinoor, which of course he actually owned, but of course he took it from a ruler in Afghanistan. So all these powerful people hand over these objects, and so academically for us, of course, it's very important because of the whole debate about decolonizing the curriculum and the whole issue of handing back objects to their countries of origin and heritage. So more of a comment, but Mike.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I actually, Kusum, I think I had a question that is possibly for you. I think my understanding is that the project it wasn't just Asian caricature, it was celebrities from Asia, Africa, and other countries. And I was wondering if there was evidence of like different ways of racialization or different ways the caricatures were done based on kind of whether stereotypes of different countries, but whether there were differences there or whether it was kind of more blanket than that. Oh, can't hear you. Oh, sorry, can you?
Yeah, your volume is not very, unmute yourself and correct your volume. Can you unmute yourself, please? You are muted, Kusum. Yeah.
Now?
Yes, that's good.
Yeah, what I noticed was, as far as I understand, it was quite individual. So it varied, it was not like categorization into different parts of the world. The Chinese will be done this way, and the Indians. Even within the Indians, there are some who have been very severely made into cartoon-like figures, like Maharaja Rajinder Singh, and but there are some which are brilliant portraits, like the Bhavna Gray, Salar Jung, and even Maharaja Sayaji Rao. They're all beautiful portraits. They're like real-life paintings. And similarly with the Chinese, we have got three from China. Two of them are excellent. They're quite similar to their actual photographs, but one of them is being highly caricatured. which is very unfair. It looks, you can sort of spot it. Similarly with African people, I think Ras McConnell's is a very accurate picture, which Bhakti studied. But there are others like Emperor Menelik. He was such a stately figure, and he was a real general, kind of an army fighter and a ruler, very royal-looking man. And he was, I think, 6'3" or something. But he's been made look diminutive as like a little doll kind of a figure. So it does vary.
Interesting, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, I mean, we've got plenty of time for more questions, but we also can kind of bring things to a close when we've exhausted the questions. So if people either type in the chat or unmute, or if there's any other questions or comments or reflections, I don't know if other volunteers want to say anything.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Just in response to the comment about the Kohinoor diamond, if it was originally taken from Afghanistan, Afghanistan was originally part of India, so it's not quite as a clear sort of theft as from India to Britain.
Yeah, I think the point I was making was that powerful people move objects around because they have the power. So it's not a question of necessarily a specific territory, but it's the flow of goods and how that's linked to the power to make that flow happen.
Yeah, can I add a comment?
Please.
Yeah, I just read today, because I was wondering what happened to the Ethiopian treasures and the illuminated manuscripts from Ethiopia that had been taken by the British after the defeat of King Theodros in 1868 at Magdala. It turns out that they are about to or have returned some of these manuscripts in September this year. But it seems that a foundation known as the Scheherazade Foundation had to buy these objects back to send back to Ethiopia. So that was quite strange to get to know. I don't know what the details are, but that's what it was reported.
Right, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes, it says Mira. I don't know if there's two of you on that screen. You'd need to unmute first to hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, good evening, everyone. Firstly, brilliant work, Kusum, Lalit, Utra, and the rest of you. And that book looks absolutely fabulous, at least the cover of it. And I'm sure it's much more fantastic inside. Well done. Very simple question. Are these caricatures always on the front of the magazine, or is there a special, like page 3 or something, where they are discarded into the magazine?
Kusum would like to answer that. You've got to unmute yourself.
Yeah, we had a look at the magazine in the British Library, and they were all in bound volumes. And it looked like there was no real cover of these magazines. At least I couldn't spot any such things. So it looks like they are they were like part of bound volumes. And I don't think they were on the cover, but probably inside. Because what the covers are like, we have no idea. It looks like just pages printed with Vanity Fair written on top. I'm not even sure whether they had a cover or the covers were removed. And we didn't come across. Yeah.
The point I was trying to get at was it a selling point by putting these people on the front cover, or was it information for general reading so that it's inside the document?
Looks
so we
more
don't
that,
know.
I think the caricatures were a very important selling point, and they used to be sold separately also in sets of sportsmen and other under different headings. But the journal itself was more than just these caricatures, because there were lots of other stuff inside it, which was of a lot of interest to different sections. So that's what my take is. I'm not sure if anybody can throw further light. I'm very happy to hear from them.
if I, unfortunately, Mira and I couldn't participate too much in this because of various travel things. I wish we had. And if I had, I would have gone with, I think it's John, isn't it, who did Ranjit Singh, the cricket gentleman, because I also, like you, have turned my arm around a little bit now and then. And it was interesting to see all the other caricatures had sort of regal clothes, they were all dressed to the hilt, even if it was a caricature. But for Ranjit Singh, it was a cricket outfit, almost saying, welcome to the British community, you're accepted as one of us. I wonder if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, he's an extraordinary person because he managed to move backwards and forwards between Britain and India. He managed to get back a principality in Gujarat that he felt he'd been defrauded of. But he also came back in the summer to play cricket for Sussex. Yeah. It's extraordinary. And he bought a castle in Ireland. He had a big house in Staines. He had a long affair with the daughter of his tutor. Yeah, so, and he may have had an illegitimate child by her. So all kinds of things were going on, and he also got very much involved in the politics of India, of course, with the coalition of princes. He was the representative, and he also spoke at the League of Nations. So an amazing career. So yeah, but very good point why they chose him in his cricket attire. But of course, his cricket attire was seen as very exotic because he had his silk shirts and
yes.
In fact, I think he was the kind of instigator of playing the ball to the leg, which of course all top batsmen do now. I never managed to do that. I always played it to the off, but you could see the stance that he was.
Yeah. They could have well used him in Brisbane yesterday.
I think so. Yeah, definitely.
Especially glancing down the leg stump where the opener was bowled first ball.
Yeah, playing across the line. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, John.
I think that he might have not been one reason for him not being presented as a ruler could have also been that he had not become the ruler then. He became the ruler of Navanagar later. So he was primarily he was a prince, and but of course he was not the ruler yet. So perhaps that could have also been an influence.
Yeah. The Nawab of Pataudi was a ruler when he played for England.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know if he was a part of the caricature layout. He probably wasn't. Yeah.
No, that was much later.
That was much later. Yes. In fact, there was a point about this 19th century, which really needs to be looked into much deeper. And I think your work is sort of leading nicely into that kind of further research, because a lot of documentation and information is available, ready. So maybe we need to scratch the surface a bit further and go deeper into this. It'd be interesting to see where you go.
Yes, and I think colonial history also deserves to be taught in schools and start being investigated and looked into, known a bit better than just being in the periphery somewhere. I think some schools do allow students to write something of whatever interests them, but I'm not very sure whether it's still taught in schools or has even begun.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Any final reflections from either people of the team, people who have been?
Hello, I'm Sushma Sabnis.
Hi.
I say a few words. I'm the artist or the painter who contributed to the theme of selective inclusion, but my take on it was slightly at a different angle. I'm a retired doctor by profession, but not particularly knowledgeable in history. Took up paint, art, and fine art as my retired profession. Anyway, so when I was approached by Kusum Jain Lalit, I was completely naive with regards to what was the content of the Vanity Fair magazine. and I wasn't familiar with the caricature fine art, so to say. Looking at all the personalities which were featured in the magazine, I was kind of taken aback that none of them were really revered by any of the local Indians at the time. Looking at the time frame, I decided to look into the time frame more deeply to see who existed during that time. And to my delight and surprise, there were 4 people I chose from. 2 of them were really, really very famous and very much respected in Indian community to this date. One was Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, who was a philosopher and world famous preacher of Hinduism. Second was Rabindranath Tagore, who was a Nobel Prize winner and for his poetry called Gitanjali. And then I wanted to choose one female because I knew that there will be somebody existed during that time frame who did a great job. And I found this Maharashtrian lady called Chimnabai Gaikwad, who became princess Queen of Baroda, married to a queen of Baroda at the time. She did a lot of charity work, and she was pro for children's education. So, and the fourth was Ilayat Khan, who was a Sufi musician and philosopher, and his daughter was the first Asian woman to get a blue plaque. I think it was last year, because she took a part in, she died in the concentration camp and played a big role in the
Second World War.
Yeah, she was
Second World War.
Second World War. But what was her work?
I think she did espionage for the British.
Yeah, she did espionage, and yeah. So anyway, so I chose these 4 people, and I didn't do any caricature, but I done a typical fine art portraits. And I want to congratulate Kusum ji and Lalit ji for doing this fabulous work and the book presentation, getting everybody on board and encouraging everybody to contribute there in their own way. So very well done, Kusum ji and Lalit ji. And thank you for getting me the opportunity to do something which I really enjoyed.
Can I request you, Sushma ji, to show some of your paintings, please, if you've got them around? Can you, please?
I don't know how to share. They are somewhere on my photo thing.
If you have them in your hand, you can put yourself on video mode and show it to us, I think. If that is not a bother. If that's a problem, then
they are tucked away safely. So
okay. No, I will take this opportunity to thank you very much, Sushma Sabnis ji, for coming on board and doing such a lot of work and taking a different point of view. And let me tell everyone here that the painting that Sushma Sabnis has done of Vivekananda, Tagore, and Chimnabai, these 3 characters are being enacted on the 12th. So if you want to see these people centuries after they have gone, you will meet them on the 12th. Inayat Khan, nobody is playing, but maybe somebody plays Inayat Khan. I would like to thank Sushma Sabnis for that. Thank you very much.
But you can display her painting on that day while those people come on stage.
Yeah, sure.
I can do that. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much.
And with that, and that is just, you may have seen Lalit in the chat has posted just the advert for the 12th of December, the Zoom pageant at 2 p.m. So that is there as well. So that sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. So we're almost at 6 p.m. So I think I'll start to draw things to a close. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. And thank you, Lalit and Kusum in particular, and John for organising the event today. It's been a delight to host it, and it's been a delight to kind of see the work and the book. And I hope you sell out quickly of the book when the new copies come in the next couple of days, and look forward to seeing the documentary in full when it's released. Thank you very much, everyone. It's been a pleasure, and congratulations.